Trump tried to stick to the script this week, highlighting policy differences with Kamala Harris. But as usual, Trump ad-libbed his way into trouble, ignoring some close advisors and insulting some of the nation's war heroes.
A radical left person wants to put price controls all over the place, which will end up driving up your prices.
In two events this week, both supposedly on the economy, Donald Trump couldn't stay on message.
She wants to change a free enterprise type country into a communist type country. That's what she knows.
Drawing from his playbook of personal attacks, which even some of his most loyal supporters are now criticizing in public.
When Trump attacks Harris personally rather than on policy, Harris's support among swing voters rises.
The winning formula for President Trump is very plain to see. It's fewer insults, more insights, and that policy contrast.
But Trump isn't listening.
I think I'm entitled to personal attacks. I don't have a lot of respect for her. I don't have a lot of respect for her intelligence.
And Trump once again insulted a key group of voters, veterans.
It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor.
While talking about giving the Presidential Medal of Freedom to a billionaire supporter, Trump, who reportedly has called soldiers who die for their country suckers and losers, diminished the nation's top military honor.
Everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets, or they're dead.
Kristen, when it comes to the advice we heard from Peter Navarro and Kellyanne Conway, don't make it personal, make it about policy, will Trump ever listen to...
Sorry,
I don't even
cut
have
you
to
off.
finish.
You don't even have to finish. We have seen so many rounds of, oh my goodness, is this going to be the time that Kellyanne finally takes the phone from Trump so that he stops tweeting or what have you? The idea that he can be contained, I feel like we've just got to get over the idea that this will ever happen. He's like Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk. Like, you can keep the normalcy going for so long. And he did, frankly. He kind of held it together through the Republican primary, through the Republican convention. And it's about 30 minutes into that speech at the Republican convention that Bruce Banner starts turning into the Hulk. And that's who we've got. He is in full Hulk mode. Good luck to anybody trying to put him back in.
Well, and speaking of Hulk mode, Lulu, Trump has never been, I think we'd all agree, a disciplined campaigner. But it seems since Biden dropped out, Harris came in, and this huge lead has just disappeared. Trump seems like he's really been knocked off kilter.
He's been knocked off kilter. He is clearly upset. He keeps talking about the same things over and over again. He's obsessed with Biden. He brings up Biden every opportunity that he can. It's kind of touching in a way. It's like The Odd Couple. Mm-hmm. It's this kind of relationship that he misses him. There's some definite tenderness there, I think. But he doesn't know what to do. And I would also say, and in this I do think that the shakeup within the Trump campaign that we've recently seen with Corey Lewandowski coming back, I think we're going to see a push to let Trump be Trump, right? Which is the whole idea that this is someone who cannot be corralled. And he has expanded the Republican Party. He has brought more people into the party. He has fundamentally changed it. And he's done that by being himself. And so I think what people are going to come to is that this is the man who won in 2016, who has managed to keep the party in his grip all this time. Let him do what he does and let the chips fall where they may.
And I think what he does, though, is starting to get boring. Like, I'm looking at the meme that came out, the racist meme that he tweeted. And yes, there was some level of outrage, but I think there was also eye rolling. It's like we've seen this show before. You're appealing to the most base instincts of voters. And I think people are kind of over it. Today in her speech, Harris pointed out, she said, he gives this talk about the economy, but the actual policy plans were really light. And so she's reversing the critique that Trump gave of her, that she had no policy. And now she's saying, where are the details besides the rage, besides the fear mongering? And I think that, she's exposing a weakness.
I want to pick up on that, Kristen, because whatever you want to say about Trump, he really he's been entertaining in a kind of demented way. And as I watched his presser at Bedminster on Thursday, I thought, what a bore. what a bore this man has become.
Well, and part of his appeal all along, or part of his political power, has been that he understands the medium of television very well. And you saw flickers of that, right? He had all of the products there lined up at that Bedminster press conference. Like, he understands entertainment, he understands television, but he can't control himself. And that's where he's getting into trouble. And so I frankly want to put this on a poll. I want to know, if you ask voters, who would you rather spend 10 minutes watching, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? I actually think that if you'd asked that question 6 months ago, Donald Trump wins that in a landslide. Doesn't mean people would vote for him, but he would win that question. I wonder what people would say today if I asked.
Because, God forbid,
Well,
first of all, it wouldn't be 10
like,
minutes.
Okay, I've seen this show
It would be an
before.
hour of droning on and on
I
and
tell you,
on.
the Trump that they don't like, though, is the one that was reading in that huge binder that looked like my sixth grader giving a book report. I mean, that's not a Trump that is going to sell anything.
Well, in fact, I thought to myself, talk about political malpractice. Who gave this man that binder? Because, I mean, it just had page after page, and he kept reading. I want to go to this other utterly gratuitous slam at the Congressional Medal of Honor winners, Jim. Why would he keep insulting vets?
I suspect that every Trump campaign advisor is asking that same question. Why? Whose idea was it that you want to compare the Medal of Honor and the Medal of Freedom, and which one is better?
I mean, the Medal of Freedom, I mean, there are a lot of great people who get it, but also billionaire donors get it, like Miriam Adelson.
Look,
nice lady, not a hero.
Besides having the focus and attention span of an over-caffeinated ferret, Donald Trump also has this impulse to focus on the dumbest thing imaginable and then make that the focus of his attention. There is an easy, well, I don't say easy, there is a soup to nuts case to be made against Kamala Harris. If nothing else, pointing out, look at who she was in her 2019 presidential campaign. Look at who she is now. Look at all of these positions she's abandoned. Who is the real Kamala Harris? Kamala Chameleon, if you can tell the Trump nickname is, there's stuff to work with there. But he's a 78-year-old man. I don't know if he can remember any of this stuff anymore. That's why he needs the giant, construction paper binder and things to flip through, and they need to make it very simple, very large font, all that kind of stuff. Like,
wow.
Maybe we should not have geriatric presidential candidates. Boy, wouldn't that be delightful?
Well, a lot of people said the key to this election was who was going to switch from the 78 to 81-year-old person. The Democrats did, and they may reap the benefits of that. While he was randomly insulting key voting blocs, Trump also went after union members who go on strike. Here he is praising Elon Musk for how Elon handles workers, and then doubling down on it.
They go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone. You're all gone.
Are you really comfortable with companies threatening to fire workers who go on strike?
Well, no, I want companies to get workers that are going to love them and work for a wage that lets the company make a profit so they can go and expand.
Kristen, has Trump jeopardized his support among union workers?
Depends on if that support is rooted in an economic populism or if it's rooted in a cultural connection. And I think there's a lot of the latter going on in Donald Trump's appeal to union workers across the country. That it's not just that they view Donald Trump as, say, a break from the Mitt Romney style economics of the Republican Party of a decade ago, but that he has something in touch with the working class in terms of cultural appeal. And that's still there regardless of comments like that.
Take a look at the CNN exit poll from 2020. As you can see there, among members of union households, 56% supported Biden, but 40% backed Trump, which is a good number for Republicans. Lulu, after Trump's remarks about union workers, strikers, to Elon Musk, the head of the United Auto Workers called him a scab.
This isn't new, though. I mean, unfortunately, I think that Donald Trump, instead of making statements that will, actually expand the kinds of people who would want to vote for him, he does the opposite. But it is cultural. He does appeal to certain values. And so I think that, I don't know that it's going to make a huge inroad.
I think wherever you go, there you are, right? And he continues to show who he really is, even though he tries to portray himself as an ally of certain groups, from veterans to auto workers. They're seeing who he is.
I think Maya Angelou said something sort of like that, right?
If they show you who you are, believe them the first time. That was her, famous quote, which also applies to this situation.
Kristen, how is the Trump campaign reacting to these comments and the populist economic agenda Vice President Harris is now laying out?
Well, they're obviously attacking her. They've said that she's gone full-blown communist. At one point, they said she has a Soviet-style price control scheme. But one thing was clear in their attacking of her, and it's what we're going to see. And actually, Matt kind of made the point for me, because we're hearing this in Republican talking points as well as from the administration, is that they are essentially laying this out as, if this is her policy, then why isn't she starting on it now? Their entire goal is to try and paint her as an incumbent whose policies are unpopular. We obviously know from polling that we saw for months when President Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket that Donald Trump polls ahead of Kamala Harris on the ahead of Joe Biden on the economy. They believe that she can also pull ahead of Kamala Harris if he continues this messaging. Now, she is right. There were not a lot of policy details in his speech, but the one thing that he has continued to double down on, and what they hope gets through to voters, is this idea of, were you better off under my administration, when inflation was lower, when interest rates were lower? And that's what he's really trying to hammer home. Now, if people start requesting more details, we obviously have asked for more details on how exactly he would try and get inflation back down. But if he puts that out, we're keeping an eye on it. But right now, the policy really messaging has been, again, I did it once, weren't you happier then? Not particularly detail focused.
Interesting. Jeff, as Kristen is reporting, the Trump campaign says Harris went, and I'm quoting now, full communist with her agenda. How are attacks like this likely to land with voters out there?
Well, look, I think it depends which voters. I mean, for the Republican base, it definitely will be music to their ears and fire them up. But those aren't necessarily the voters that matter the most. They're the independent voters in the middle. And now there definitely is a new presidential race upon us here. And she's walking a very fine line by trying to embrace some of the Biden-Harris record, and also trying to draw a contrast with what the former president is proposing. So what independent voters are looking for is perhaps change. Almost every election, Wolf, is a change election. And suddenly, change is also on the side of the Democrats. It certainly wasn't with President Biden at the top of the ticket. So she owns the record of the administration, but she also has the unique ability to present something forward, present something new. So that is what voters are going to have to sort out here. But I think the contrast was very, very stark. And this is something we've not seen actually in about 24 years or so. When Al Gore, of course, was running, he embraced some elements of the Clinton administration, but also tried to move on and pivot. Since then, we've not seen a vice president running while the president is still in office. So it's going to be a fascinating exercise to see how voters sort through all of this. But the specific things of a communism, I'm not sure those land very well with voters in the middle of this, who simply want something to be done by Washington here. So a very interesting speech that just began putting some meat on these policy bones.
Eva McKent is on the scene for us, joining us live from Raleigh right now. Eva, break down today's speech, what it means.
Wolf, this speech was quite significant because this is the first time that we heard the vice president outline her concrete economic policy goals. A Harris administration would go after price gougers. A Harris administration would aggressively pursue increasing the child tax credit from $2,000 to $3,600, $6,000 for low-income families, middle-class families. Perhaps the loudest applause line came when she pledged to pursue $25,000 for first-time homebuyers. But Wolf, what was also significant is how she framed this conversation in deeply personal terms, talking about how significant it was in her own life when her mother could finally afford to buy a home. Talking about how she understood what it was like when you have to stretch those dollars in order to buy groceries. She also recalled working at McDonald's as a young person and seeing her then colleagues try to make that money work to raise families. Take a listen to how she is framing this conversation.
If you want to know who someone cares about, look who they fight for. Donald Trump fights for billionaires and large corporations. I will fight to give money back to working and middle-class Americans.
And so conservatives already lining up to dismiss these policy proposals as socialist. It is worth noting, Wolf, that many of the proposals would require a future President Harris to work in concert with Congress, and that Democrats have in the past offered a lot of these policies but had difficulty ultimately getting them over the finish line. Wolf?
Eva McKend in North Carolina for us. Eva, thank you very much for that report. I want to get some more on all of this. Our panel of political experts is joining us right now. Jeff Zeleny, this was a populist economic message from the vice president, even separating herself from President Biden's policies in some ways. Talk a little bit about that.
Wolf, it definitely was economic populism, but also it really struck me that this is really the first time we're seeing her making her case against Donald Trump through the idea of policies. So for all this talk, for really the last several months, is this going to be a referendum on the Biden administration or a choice with the former president? And she is trying to draw a sharp contrast with the policies of a potential new administration for the former president and what she would do. Now, she embraced the Biden policies to a point, but she also focused much more on trying to bring down the cost of housing, the cost of food. Now, there weren't a ton of specifics here, but this is a presidential campaign. She was laying out her vision. She certainly stopped well short of saying how she would specifically pay for any of this, but she really went after the Trump specific policies on the economy. And he has inflationary policies. There's no question about it. So trying to blunt the own sort of backlash on the and blaming the inflation on the Biden administration and trying to flip the script a little bit. So it was pretty fascinating in terms of drawing that a contrast, but perhaps more than anything, just weaving in her life stories, working at a McDonald's, talking about that American dream when her mother was able to buy their first home, and remembering what that felt like. That is what these policy speeches are about. I mean, it's a reminder. Most Americans still don't know that much about her. So she's clearly trying to use even speeches like this to fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah, that's really important too. Megan Hayes is with us. Megan, the vice president didn't release new details on how she's going to help pay for all these new proposals. Is that a mistake?
No, I don't think so. I think that people want to see what her hopes are and her vision is for moving into a Harris administration. I think that, just like Jeff was saying, that she's building upon the Biden administration success that they've had and then going a little bit further into housing, into cutting costs for groceries. So I think that people just see the vision and are hopeful, and they just want to see how that she is thinking of a plan and is going to move that into the future.
Matt Gorman, do you think a speech like this one steals some of Trump's populist thunder?
I don't think it steals it. I think one of the commonalities is we're hearing both some more populist rhetoric from the right and the left nowadays, certainly with J.D. Vance now on the ticket as well. I think a couple things. I think number one, over the last several, weeks, Kamala's taken care to try and flip-flop on so many of her positions she took in the 2020 presidential race through kind of anonymous aides moderating those things. But this first policy thing goes pretty far left. I think that was a notable shift. And also, if you were kind of blacked out for the last 4 years, you would think that she was the challenger. She was the incumbent vice president of the United States. There wasn't a lot of talk about, let's face it, a lot of the crises with inflation and housing happened during the Biden-Harris administration. There's a little bit of memory holding of that I took note of during the speech as well.
Kristen Holmes, Vice President Harris also went after Trump's ability to stay on message when he visited North Carolina recently. Listen and watch this.
2 days ago, Donald Trump was here in North Carolina. He said he was going to talk about the economy. I think you all watched. You know what I'm about to say. But he offered no serious plans to reduce costs for middle-class families. No plan to expand access to housing or health care. And that, actually, I think for most of us, was not surprising.
In our Money Lead this week, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris showered us with very big promises about how they will help the economy, even if the sort of guys on details on how and whether those promises will actually work. So we've asked a pair of experts to debate what both presidential candidates are actually promising. Stephen Moore, when you ask the former president or his team about his inflation plan, they talk about energy prices. Drill, baby, drill, to steal the parlance of, goodness, maybe 2010 Republicans. Even leaving climate change aside, which is ignoring a lot, I guess my question with this always is, the U.S. is already a top gas producer and oil producer. They don't drive global oil prices in isolation. What do they mean here?
Is that for me?
Yes, Steve, please.
Okay, sure. So, look, we were completely energy independent when Trump was president. We were really proud of the fact that, we had achieved something that we hadn't achieved in 50 years. We weren't dependent on Russia, or we weren't dependent on OPEC. In fact, OPEC, we didn't even talk about OPEC was president. Now, you're right, we are producing a record amount of oil today, but guess what? That's because the price of oil is about 40% more expensive than it was when Trump was president. So our analysis shows we'd be producing about 3 or 4 million more barrels a day with a pro-drilling policy that builds the pipelines and the infrastructure, the leasing that we need so we could be energy dominant again. And I do agree with Trump. If we had stuck with that policy, I don't think you'd see Russian tanks in Ukraine today.
Catherine, the vice president, a focal point of what... Please, yeah.
Sorry, can I just amend that?
Yes.
Because a lot of it's wrong. We are energy independent today if you are measuring energy independence by the fact that we are exporting more oil than we are importing. In fact, we've been such for over 2 years, the longest stretch in American history. And that was the metric by which Trump and supporters like Stephen Moore referred to energy independence when Trump was in office, which we briefly had and we've now had for longer under Biden. I don't think either president, to be clear, controls the oil spigot, but we are now producing more oil today in this country than any other country on earth has ever produced. Not only that, we also have record production of natural gas, of solar, of wind, record battery production, storage capacity. So the idea that there's some sort of war on American energy is just bogus. All of those things have been going up under Biden. In fact, he's approved more drilling permits on federal lands than Trump did. So there's this narrative out there that is just completely false, that Biden has somehow turned off the oil spigot.
Catherine, then explain why it is that gasoline is 45% more expensive today at the gas pump. That's what Americans care about. We should be producing. No, we should be producing. We could be producing 3 or 4.
Do you know a good way to get gas prices down? Do you know a good way to get gas prices down? Have a global pandemic and have everybody stay at home. That is why gas prices plummeted in 2020. That is 100% why. That's why oil prices were negative briefly in 2020. We had a pandemic.
Yeah. Catherine, even before the pandemic, the price of gas was about 40% cheaper than it is today.
Yeah, and also the overall CPI has increased.
Go ahead.
Hold on. Have you told all your green friends that we're producing record amounts of oil and gas? I thought the idea for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden was net zero, and now you're having it both ways.
I don't represent Joe Biden. I don't represent Joe Biden. I know you represent Donald Trump. I know you're a surrogate for Donald Trump. I don't represent any political candidate. I have written many times about the record oil production.
Guys, hang on one second.
What I'm saying, though, is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are talking out of two sides of their mouth. They're telling all their environmental friends, we're going to eliminate fossil fuels. And then on the other hand, they're saying, we're producing record amounts of it. You can't have it both ways.
No.
It has been a complicated balancing act.
Those are what the facts are.
Yeah, no, I do want to ask you though, Catherine, because you make a good point. You have been sharply critical of the Biden administration and some of the Harris proposals when you feel like it's merited. One of them being what has been a focal point of what they've been talking about this week, which is a quote unquote federal ban on price gouging. Donald Trump has called it communist, as prices will come down quickly if he's elected. I think I'm trying to think in economic history, which you both know far better than me, but I think yesterday was the 53rd anniversary of President Nixon announcing federal wage and price controls. Didn't work. Catherine, the kind of validity of this proposal, is it something that could work?
I don't exactly know what she's even proposing with this anti-price gouging idea. Nobody can define price gouging. It's like porn. I know it when I see it, as the famous line goes, which is part of the problem here. So we don't really know what she's proposing. The fact sheet that the campaign put out a few days ago had a lot of things that I found quite disturbing, that indicated the template for this proposal would be something like the legislation Kamala Harris sponsored in 2020 with Elizabeth Warren, and that Elizabeth Warren has since reintroduced this year in a slightly different form, that would essentially look like price controls. If you listen to what Kamala Harris said today in her speech, it was actually, frankly, much more restrained and much more toned down than what the campaign had put out a few days ago, which gives me hope that maybe they're not going to go down this very bad and silly path, which, as you point out, has been very harmful in other countries that implemented price controls. But we don't know what this is going to look like. I would love to see more details, hint, hint, campaign, if you're willing to share them.
Steve, can I ask on this issue of grocery prices? We saw the former president was flanked by groceries yesterday. His team thinks that this is a really winning contrast message for them. What's his plan? Is there a plan to bring down grocery prices?
Well, yeah, I mean, we just do what Trump did in his first term. And let's not forget, Bill, that if you look at Trump's record on inflation, when he left office, the inflation rate was 1.5%. And then 18 months later, after Biden and Harris spent $5 trillion, we had a 9% inflation rate. And so it's obvious that if you care about inflation and bringing prices down, Trump has a much better record. In fact, the average inflation rate under Trump in his 4 years in office was 1.9%, which is actually below what the Fed wants as a target. Meanwhile, under Harris and Biden, you've had an average inflation rate of 6.5%. And the reason that's important, by the way, I think the reason that Harris is fighting back on this is because the average American has lost $2,000 of income since Biden came into office. That's a big loss.
This is something we should block a full hour off for you guys to go back and forth there. Because I know I could see Catherine. Catherine was ready to rock and roll about supply chain issues, the spending from the Trump administration.
Well, and also what Donald Trump actually has proposed on prices, which would cause them to go up.
We're going to have to do this.
I'm
pitching this to everyone at this point. Catherine and Stephen, always love Justice Potter Stewart Friday references. Thank you guys for the lively debate.